Well, thanks very much indeed. I'll deal with the second question first because that's very germane to our problem. Gates Foundation always saying to us, show us your metrics and we'll fund you. But the trouble is those statistics don't exist and aren't collected. And when they are collected, they're particular to the individual crops or individual countries. If you could, in fact, have the statistics of all vegetables put together, it would be a very major industry, and I think people would take it more seriously. But worldwide, that lack of collection of statistics is a problem and something that we would have difficulty in addressing because we're very small at the moment. Perhaps FAO can help us under those circumstances. Regarding fruits, again, it's an issue of, with very few scientists, should we expand into fruits? One of the good things is that one of the major fruits of Tanzania, the tomato, is an AVRDC bred variety and is now being released into about 16 different countries in Eastern and Southern Africa and managed to improve yields by about 40% for local farmers. So the impact of research can be very substantial in this area because, in fact, not so much has been done before. And I would have said that the rate of return to research is very, very substantially higher for these undervalued crops than it is perhaps for the mainstream ones. And if you're looking for rapid and large payoff, it's not a bad investment.
Thank you. Next question, since we are on that side, there's the lady there. Yep.
I'm Dr. Ray, Tata Institute of Social Science, Bombay, India. I was asking that for biofortification, whether we can use the same seed to get the next generation crop, we cannot. Then what will be the cost factor that is coming for the farmers? Because in India, farmers usually save their seeds for the next cultivation. And another thing is whether application of this technology is increasing the cost of the seeds?
No, it's not increasing the cost of the seeds. Perhaps I should emphasize that all of the crops coming out under Harvest Plus are conventionally bred. For example, this release that's coming out in 2012, this high iron pearl millet, it's an open pollen variety. So it's, it can be replanted each year. It's an improved version of something called ICTP. It's actually higher yielding than the present version. It's higher in iron. So farmers presently growing ICTP will want to replace their existing varieties. So no, the seeds cost the same and everything's in the public domain. If it's open pollinated, they can be replanted from the previous harvest. There are some crops, for example, the maize that's coming out in Zambia, it's a hybrid maize, but hybrids are widely grown in Zambia. Even hybrid pearl millets are widely grown in India. And we will bring out a hybrid pearl millet later on, but they'll have to buy the seeds from the company. But I think it's something like 85% of pearl millet production in India is hybrids.
Thank you. Yes, please. Next question.
This is the technical session, and the governance session is next door. But I've got a question for the panel about the governance of agricultural research. We've heard there's a, sorry, I'm Jeff Fager from London International Development Center. We've heard a lot of exciting science about improving cereals, improving vegetables. Other groups could talk about improving livestock for nutrition. And the question I have is, at the end of this process, are we going to have all these technologies sitting on the shelf for people to pull off? Or is there a role for integration by the research community into what kinds of combinations of these approaches should work where? Clearly, it's quite possible that the commodification of research leads to a degree of competition between the different institutions promoting different kinds of nutrient sources. That doesn't have to be the case. I think we all appreciate that diversity is important to mix and match in different contexts. But how's that process going to be done? Will it be a process of the organizations here? Or will it be simply an off-the-shelf, buy what you want process? without a degree of strategic integration of research around particular targets.
Thank you, Jeff. Now, who would like to answer that? Dino.
I think it's fair to say there's a good concentration of effort in trying to integrate the various sources of potential agricultural income. Let me give you an example that CIMMYT and IRRI have had for many years now, a rice wheat consortium, which is now evolving into something newer. That consortium now will also involve additional crops like mung bean and chickpea, and therefore you have to fit all those into the necessary rotation. So work is being done to do that. Likewise with zero tillage that's being done here in India in cereals. There is also then the need to fit in additional legume crops and other alternatives either in rotation or in sequence. So that type of work is being done. But I have to say that for the location-specific type of work, it tends to be through partners rather than through the individual international centers, though they are very concerned of that because there's huge demand for measuring impact, and if you don't go down those steps, essentially you don't have any impact in the long run.
I can entertain two more questions. I'm going to turn back here. One question and then I'll go to the back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim Wheeler, Department for International Development. The panel members in their comments covered various interventions, policy changes, and partnership efforts to achieve nutritional outcomes. Clearly, it's important to evaluate such interventions after the appropriate period of time. So I'd like to invite each panel member to suggest what parameters, indices, or changes in practice they would suggest should be measured or monitored to provide evidence of what works and what does not work for their examples.
Thank you. Would you like to do that, Lindsay? Would you?
Well, for me, it's clear that through the part of the metric has to be percent of the population who are not consuming their estimated average requirements and who are consuming amounts above that. And then you can add biomarkers as well for assessment and evaluation. That's the core of the issue.
Well, in Harvest Plus, what we did with the pilot dissemination of orange sweet potato was do a baseline survey, do a follow-up survey, and we measured how the production of orange sweet potato changed, how the intakes of orange sweet potato changed, and we took blood measures as well. It's very expensive. You want to do that in a few specific cases on relatively small samples. Once you've established that that system works, I think later on as you scale up, in the end, you basically just want to measure the number of households who've adopted or do some quick surveys on who's consuming the biofortified product.
For vegetables, particularly for the small plot work, it's the actual consumption of vegetable that becomes critical, and we would certainly measure those post hoc. And the close association between the consumption of vegetables and low birth weights, infant mortality, and undernutrition in the under fives is something that we would hope to be able to monitor through our medical colleagues.
I talked a lot about partnerships. I mean, I think it's critical that we don't leave these research innovations on the shelf, that we do get those new varieties off the shelf through partnerships. And it's not just partnerships with the National Agricultural Research Institutes, it's also partnerships with local seed companies. It's partnerships with new seed companies that are being formed by AGRA and others in Africa. You know, we can measure those. We can measure the access to new innovation that we're bringing into the system. We can measure how much of that gets into the hands of farmers who really need them, and how much is being used by farmers at the end of the day.
My colleagues who work on the effectiveness of targeting of different types of interventions, such as for conditional cash transfers, have very good methodologies for tracking impact. Not all of them may translate directly when you're talking about nutritional technology types of innovations, partly because you have to, I mean, the measurement of diet in terms of actual intake is always a problem, but sometimes in order to set up that experimental design, you have to get some buy-in on the part of the disseminator of the technology to make sure that the diffusion is random enough that you can be able to pick up that effect and control for the other things that you don't want to confound your results. But I think there's been a lot of effort, there's a lot of funding that goes into looking at good impact assessment. EEE, there's a lot of different organizations that are really focusing on how to do that. So I think it's just a question of getting that together with the nutritional interventions.
Okay, the last question. Okay, Uttam, I'll give it to you.
Thank you very much. If I may, this is Uttam Gupta, Executive Director, Crop Life India. I have had the opportunity of spending almost 2 decades in the fertilizer industry, and we have the doyen of the international fertilizer industry sitting just across us. I would like to leverage the opportunity of having Mr. Luc Mene on the floor over there. You talked about the nutrition security. Yes, that's a good move in the right direction. And here in India, we are certainly taking a lot of policy reforms which are primarily intended to take care of the nutritional security. I would not like to take you into those details, but I would certainly at this particular point of time like to have your perspectives in a very exciting and challenging situation at this point of time when the very foundation of fertilizer security in India, and I'm sure this would be the situation in many other developing countries as well, the very foundation of fertilizer security is getting shaken, and being shaken primarily because of very disturbing trends on the international scene. We have seen the prices, international prices of phosphates, potash, urea, almost across the board. The prices have been rising very steeply. The dependence of developing country like India at this point of time is substantial. Almost 30 to 40% of the fertilizer nutrient requirements of India, they are being imported. And this has huge ramifications even in terms of broader policies like subsidies. We are giving something like $25 billion worth of subsidies being given on fertilizers. So I would like to have from the global head of the Fertilizer Association as to what his perspective and what his prescription is in order to be able to sustain fertilizer security, which is fundamental to nutrient security. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Uttam. I regret having given you the floor because I would need another hour to elaborate on the question that you have asked, and I can have that discussion with you separately. But what I would like to say, because you did mention India, and you mentioned the fertilizer security in India and what's happening in the fertilizer scene. One thing that I would like to draw the attention of the audience to is that there has been a fundamental shift here in India when it comes to fertilizers, in the sense that in the past there was only the major nutrients were targeted, and only the major nutrients were recognized as real plant nutrients, and that has changed completely. Now we're talking about micronutrients are recognized as plant nutrients, and that is one major step forward. So in other words, if from a policy point of view, if you can convince the government that it is not just 3 elements that are required to grow plants and to make sure that you not only have food security but nutrition security, that there are a whole host of other elements that need to come in, I think you've made a major step forward. As to the international scene, we'll have that discussion separately. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know we're running a little bit late, 5 minutes late, so I am not going to wrap up because this afternoon I have to make a report to the plenary session. So I would like to ask you to, together with me, to thank the panelists for their excellent presentations.